set 3 reveals.
Hey everybody, it's Espira, and we're back with another Battle Spirits Saga video. This time we're jumping into reveals, specifically the green starter deck, which has me so hype. We've had the set 1 cards known since February, which means we were basically like 4, almost 5 months into knowing what these cards do. And even though the set's only been out properly for a bit over a month, it has felt like we've been here forever, because we kind of have been. So the fact that we're getting fresh cards is absolutely exciting, especially green, so that we can finally see what it's doing. We know that it involves ramp. I've looked at the cards, very interesting, very good stuff. So with that said, let's go check out to see how good exactly this starter deck is. To kick us off, we have the key spirit of the starter deck, Rooster, Zodiac, Emperor, Gale, Phoenix. 8 cost, 4 green reduction. On levels 1, 2, and 3 during either attack step, when the spirit or one of your spirits with Swift destroys one of your opponent's spirits via comparing BP, select one of your opponent's spirits and exhaust it, effectively forcing it to be like kind of like a dual block, almost like a dual attack in that sense. And then on levels 2 and 3, when the spirit attacks, select one of your opponent's spirits and exhaust it. Swift, we'll be seeing it down the road with a couple cards, but basically it's Flash Summon. On basically what everyone thought Flash Awaken was meant to do, Flash Swift is that's that. You're able to summon spirits during your flash step. I will say I don't think this card's that great. On levels like 3, it's an 8k. Or on 3 cores, it's an 8k. On 6 cores, it's an 11k. Those are big stats. Like, it's a big statted body. And I get that you're the ramp color, right? So you don't mind paying a lot for certain things. But it just feels like you're not really getting your value in this, right? Like, generally, even if defensively you're like swifting things in and then like you block and then that might get an exhaust on something else, the swift bodies aren't actually really all that big, which means generally if you have a Gale Phoenix on board already, because it doesn't have swift. So if you have a Gale Phoenix on board already, they're probably not likely to attack unless they can already attack with something that's bigger. And there's no swift body that's actually big enough to warrant trying to block with it and then maybe destroy one of your opponent. It's very weird because swift bodies are statted, at least in the starter deck, are statted very much to not be good blockers. So generally it's just expensive. It's a lot, and you're effectively paying 4 cores plus 1 to even get an ability that might not even proc off ever. And then it takes the additional 3 cores for you to be able to use an ability that in the starter deck we'll see only costs like 2. So it's very expensive, and generally your opponent's gonna be able to play around it, which, like, sure, there's something to say about forcing your opponent to have to play a certain way, but I definitely am not in love with it at all. Either way, super cool. I mean, it looks dope. I love the art, but in terms of playability, I think there's a couple of issues in regards to how Swift plays out that Gale Phoenix just kind of doesn't make sense with. Moving on, we have Emerald Grapebird Aldeed, a 5 cost 3 green reductions prey bird. On levels 1 and 2, when summoned, select one of your opponent's spirits and exhaust it. And then on level 2, 4, 3 cores, when the spirit attacks, place a core from the void into your reserve. This is so dope. I love this card. Okay, this is great, right? It's very similar to what Gale Phoenix was trying to do, right? We're trying to exhaust our opponent's spirits, but now it's on summon, so it's on demand. It means that we can exhaust like a Nomen Guard, right? Or some really annoying blocker, and then we can kind of go in. And then if we're going in with this specific card, we're now ramping. I love ramp. There have been a few ways in set 1 that we've been able to core boost, I think people like to call it, notably in white. Now the fact that we can more proactively do it is great. This card's dope. I don't know if you run as a 4 for what it's worth, but I think is definitely a card that's able to kind of shut down a lot of what your opponent's doing. Right now, there's no armor green. I don't doubt that white has a little bit of armor green going into set 2, but nevertheless, I think there's so many things in which people rely on like one specific spirit on the board to kind of control everything. Peggy, an example of one. And I think the ability to kind of shut that down is really, really big, especially when we account for the fact that we're going to see some burst cards afterwards. That'll make it even more viable to be able to play them in a way that'll be very disadvantageous for our opponent. So absolutely excited. Love this card. Playability is still up in the air, but I do definitely like this way more than the key spirit for the deck. Moving on from there, we have Leaf Beak Toucan, a 3 cost 2 green reduction prey bird. On level 1, it's a 3k. On level 2, it's a 6k. Not bad. It's not the best statted vanilla in the deck. Not much to say about it. I think we'll stop at the ones that kind of have like prevalent BP points. But this is just kind of too expensive for the stats that you're getting. Going on to Viscount Manoba, a 4 cost 2 green reduction to prey bird. On levels 1 and 3 has got nothing, but it has Flash Swift. You may summon this card from your hand by using cores from your reserve to pay its cost and place cores onto it. Basically, all the cores need to come from your reserve. So it's telegraphed a bit, right? If your green opponent has cores in their reserve, odds are they're probably going to be swifting stuff in. But there's so much counterplay in that, and I'll talk about that when we've gone over the cards. So that's one thing to remember. Just know that all the cores need to come from reserve, not only the cost, but the maintenance cores as well. It can be incredibly powerful. It means that you can kind of bait out your opponent's battle tricks. If you're attacking, your opponent uses a battle trick, thinking that they've cleared out the entire board, and then you can swift in some bodies. Or on your opponent's turn, when they swing in with their last attacker, or they swing in with one attacker or whatever, you can really mess up their combat math by just swifting in a body or two. And now, you know, it's all about, can they mitigate the bodies? Do they have enough cores for removal on their turn before you go into your turn? You're giving yourself so many more reductions that your opponent didn't think you have. It is incredibly solid. Telegraphed, because the cores do need to stay in reserve, so it's very clear when you want to do that. And then there's counterplay in the fact that your opponent can just not skip the attack phase, but basically opt to not attack, which doesn't give you a flash window. And then you've kind of just passed your turn, but maybe that's what your deck wants to do. So I think it lends itself to a lot more mind games in regards to like, what is your opponent doing right now? If I have cores in my reserve, just for the sake of I have nothing to put them on, I could be baiting my opponent to think I have Swift Spirits, even if I'm not a green deck, which is absolutely sick. Moving on, we have Explosive Charger Brandboar, a 6-cost, 2 green reduction Blade Beast on level 1 and 2 during your attack step. When one of your spirits is summoned, this spirit gains 2 KBP during this turn. So basically, if you're able to like swift in whatever. And then on level 2, while the spirit attacks or blocks, refresh the spirit when it destroys one of your opponent's spirits via comparing BP. This card sucks. Like, here's the thing, guys. A lot of these cards are like, hey, if you die during comparing BP, it's like, okay, well then basically you're saying if my opponent chump blocks, which is like, fine, sure. Or if my opponent literally commits suicide with their spirit. So I don't know. I think this is like fine. I don't even think it's fine. It's just not great. Your opponent's almost never going to play into this. The 2K bump has potential to kind of get big, but like it's 4 cores to be a 9K, which means on like one Swift summon, you become an 11K, which is like fine, but that also costs you like a core, at least plus 1 maintenance core. So it's a lot. It's asking you to do a lot. And it basically tells your opponent to like play into it, which isn't really kind of forcing all that much. So I am not the biggest fan of Brandboar. Then we have Leaf Wolf, which is just, hey, it's a cheap Swift. That's all it is. 2-cost, 1 green reduction Blade Beast on a 2K, 3K, or a 4K, respectively, on levels 1, 2, and 3. And it's got Flash Swift. That's all it needs to be. When you got your green reduction on board, it's going to cost you 1 to be able to get them on board. This is the one that's like, there are going to be games where your opponent like swings once thinking he's good, and then you just pay, 3 cores and then 3 maintenance to put 3 of these dummies on the board, and then it's just like, go. So realistically, at the moment, and this is why I'm saying that the Swift strategy in the deck is a little confused, because Gale Phoenix is asking you to kill things with these cards, but it becomes a 4K on 5. If we go back to the Manoba, it's a 4K on 3. These stats are absolutely horrendous for trying to do anything that's defensive. So I don't know what that is, but generally we've seen that these starter decks have kind of been split strategies where they try to do one thing and another. So it could be that the starter deck has lower to the ground Swift bodies, and then in the main set we have bigger, more blockable Swift bodies. So we'll see, but that's the matter. Either way, Leaf Wolf is great, one of the best cards in the deck, just because it is a cheap Swifter. That's all you need it to be. We could have more, and I'm all for more, but this is definitely all it needs to be. Then we have Forced Quill Beast Porcupine, 4-cost, 2 green reduction, Blade Beast on level 1. It's a 5K. On level 2, it's a 7K. It's fine. It's a big booty. I will say the 1 core 5K makes it one of the more notable vanillas, but it does cost 2, but that's fine. You're like the ramp color. So generally, I think it's okay. It's not the best. Generally, when we talk about vanillas, we kind of cap off at the ones that are 1 reduction away from basically being free. So a 3-cost 2 reduction, a 4-cost 3 reduction, So more notable because 5K is a pretty good stat line. It fades a lot of red removal, but that's only relevant in set 1. So there could be a chance that set 2 removal is so much better that our BP points change. But at the moment, it's decent if you run this. Yeah, I don't think that's terrible. Then we have a Viridian Dragonwire Grun. I love this card. 5-cost, 2 green reductions. Carapace. I don't know what a carapace is. I presume it's like a bug. When destroyed by opponent, place 2 cores from the void into reserve. Dude, I love my ramp. I love that I can chump block with him. I'm going to get 2 cores for it. That is sick. I will take a block that says gain 2 cores. That is awesome, especially since it'll provide the additional cores I'll probably need to be defensive anyways. He needs 1 on him at least, so he dies, and then I gain 2. So now I have 3 cores. Presumably I have some kind of green reduction on the board. So realistically, I can cast 4 or 5 cost magics with it. That'll probably help me end my opponent's turn. And then I accelerated 2 turns. That's sick. I love that. It's super, super good. And then on levels 2 and 3, while the spirit attacks, when the battle ends, you may place 2 cores from the spirit into your reserve to select one of your spirits. It gains 3k BP during this turn. That's cute. Honestly, I'm gonna be straight, guys. I don't think you're using this almost ever. There's a world in which it matters, but it's when the battle ends, which means if your opponent had battle tricks that were relevant to the fact that your spirits were a lower BP, you could do that. But it does make your lower BP ones that maybe weren't able to win a battle actually win out of battle. So it's not awesome. But the fact that the cores don't go away to your trash is a big deal. So you're basically not actually costing yourself anything, which is kind of dope. Also, I know it's not green, but it's a Beldegor target, Immortal 5, which is awesome. So you want something to die, and then you're going to potentially get something out of it. So I think of which you got 2 cores to pay for it. So I don't know. I know I'm a little too excited, but I love these kinds of effects. I think this is a phenomenal body. If we ever end up getting a 0-cost green spirit elemental like we did in Elemental Spark, these kinds of cards are exactly what you want to be able to see on like a turn 1 where you're going elemental, get the reduction to play into this kind of a body. It's sick. I love it. Big, big, big fan. One of the best cards easily in the starter deck. Moving on from there, we have the AntMan Soldier, a 2-cost Carapace. On 1, it's a 3k. On 2, it's a 4k. This is fine. It is okay. When we think of other 2-cost spirits, 3k for 1 is decent. And then on the 2, 4k is like, okay, we've hit 5. Odds are we're going to power creep even more into that in set 2. So it's literally okay. It's not one of the premier 2-costs vanillas, but if you run it, honestly, 2 cores to be a 4k on turn 1, not terrible. Then we have the Capricorn, a 1-cost, 1 green reduction Wild Soul. So this is our free 1-cost. On levels 1 and 2 during your opponent's attack step, at the start of the step, if the spirit has a soul core on it, place a core from your trash into your reserve. So it's basically free, right? It itself, when you play it, presuming you use the soul core, will always come back, assuming it doesn't die from removal, which means, you know, it pulls up suppression. It gives you more options in terms of what to do with your soul core. But in general, it just basically says, I am free. It doesn't stack because you only ever have 1 soul core. So again, typically these 1-drops tend to have abilities that don't stack. Camelot Knight is like an example of one. This one, again, doesn't stack. You're only ever going to get the refresh once, but hey, it turns on swift because the core goes to your reserve. It gives you more options in terms of what you can do with your magics. Super solid 1-drop. It's a 1-drop that is basically free. It doesn't scale with multiple bodies, but it effectively is, and it basically refreshes you a core every single turn the longer it goes if you're committed to continuing to pay with your soul core. So solid. I am about this. I think it is one of the better ones where oftentimes we'll be talking about how we should be running 1-drops to get our reductions online and kind of make things more clean for us. This does that in a premier fashion because it is giving us the core back, which is absolutely great. Absolutely awesome. Kind of exactly everything a 1-drop wants to do. And the stat line is pretty terrible, but at least it's kind of doing what we want it to do. Moving on from there, we have the Mantan Goal, a 3-cost, 1 green reduction plant folk. On levels 1, 2, and 3, when summoned, you may exhaust this spirit to place a core from the void onto it. Not terrible, right? We just more ramp. How good this is as ramp will kind of just depend on what the main set ramp looks like, but so far it's not terrible. I think it works. The fact that the core goes to the void isn't awesome. I would love to get the core right away. And then, of course, you're doing it without getting a blocker. So this is costing you 3 cores to gain a core that you don't have access to right away. It's not the worst. But seeing how like explosive a lot of decks are, I don't know if you can typically afford this. It's definitely not a 4 of, I almost want to say. I mean, like you play it on turn 1, it's actually an amazing turn 1 play. So maybe you play 4 of just for that. And then you just have the extra core, and then it's super sick. Your opponent attacks you twice, but then you're going into your turn with like 7 cores. That's kind of neat. So we'll see. I am iffy on this one. It'll totally depend. If aggro's big, getting a body that can't block is kind of an egg. If aggro's not big and we're a little bit slower, I think there's a lot of opportunity for this card to see play. Then we have the Sacred Tree Stump City, our first Nexus, a 4-cost, 2 green reductions on levels 1 and 2. The first spirit you control that attacks each turn gains 1k BP for each green spirit you control. So hey, if you went dummy wide, you're going to get 1 for every single one. That's fine, to be honest. That's not that big of a deal. On level 2, however, during opponent's attack step, draw a card when an opponent reduces your life. So kind of like a reverse Scorched Battlefield. I don't know, dude. For 3 cores? For 3 cores, you're finally inviting your opponent to hit you. You know what? If like these were flipped, where the level 2 was the level 1 and 2, I think at that point it could be playable, because you could play it on turn 1, and then it's just like, okay, now if you start attacking into me when I did effectively nothing my first turn, then go ahead. This wants you to be aggressive, which like that's not where at least the cards we have right now want you to be. This isn't it. this is not it. I think if you're in a position where you're putting 3 cores onto this to draw a card, maybe you should just play Star Blessed or like any other draw card, which at the moment there are no draw cards for this color outside of things like this. But this is just not where you want to be, in my opinion. It's too slow. It costs too much. This is not it. Then we have Airborne Crag, 3 cost, 1 green reduction. Next one, this one's a little spicy. During either attack step, when one of your spirits is summoned, it gains 2k BP for the turn. So this is what makes our Swift Spirits a little bit more blockable. But again, we're turning our like 4Ks if they have 1,000,000 cores on them into 6Ks. So already that still isn't all that fantastic of a blocker. And then during your end step for 2 cores, refresh any of your spirits with a soul core on them. This is the one where you can get a little bit cheeky if you have things that have 1 attack and 1 block triggers. It's not stuck to only your green spirits. So if you have any spirits that have some really good procs on that front, you have now kind of like a cheap way to be able to utilize that. But of course, it requires the soul core. It's fine. It's not amazing, but I mean, it's like a mini Gnomon Guard, right? In that like you're able to choose whatever you want to be able to refresh it every turn. And it's flexible because you can move the soul core around to choose what that thing is. Still, I think it's a little bit expensive for what that is, especially since you're kind of committing your soul core to a specific thing. But nevertheless, I think it's literally fine. That's where I leave it at. Then we have Savage Power, a 3 cost, 2 green reduction magic. Burst, when an opponent destroys your spirit, you may summon a green card from your hand by using cores from your reserve to pay its cost and then place cores onto it. You may then pay this card's cost to activate its flash effect, in which its flash is a 2k BP battle trick. This card's dope. This card's super, super dope. This color is definitely one of those colors that lends itself to having your spirits die. And if you tie it in with like the 5 cost, now you're ramping a core and now you have 3 cores in your reserve to be able to pay into something. So on that front, it's super solid in terms of like the color synergy, because you're constantly dumping cores into your reserve. And now you have it to be able to play into something. And this is where we're able to play like those prey birds that I was saying right at the beginning, the Aldeed, where it exhausts when your opponent's spirits and then we're able to ramp on swing. So this card is obviously a little bit situational in that you're going to have your stuff die, but that's not too hard in this color. But the fact that the best part of this card is on its burst is obviously something that lends itself to being a little questionable. I don't think this is something you can securely run as a 4 of, especially since it'll only ever be as good as spirits that you can play in your hand. But I think as a 1 or 2 of tech, I think this could put your opponent in really weird positions, especially if you just have so many cores that your opponent ends up attacking into something. You could literally block with a 1 cost, and then you can play like an 8 cost. So that front is sick. This is one of the ways you can get Gale Phoenix out in a way that's meaningful, but that's a little expensive. Either way, I think this card's super dope, and obviously will only ever scale as far as we have great green spirits. So pretty high on this card. It's not an end all be all, but it is super cool that it effectively gives every single green spirit in our decks swift when we need it. Moving on from Savage Power, we have Needle Shot, which is kind of like the premier, hey, this is what green removal does. 3 cost, 2 green reduction, main flash, select one of your opponent's spirits and exhaust it. This is very similar in tone to Beam Rifle, which we saw in the kind of like leaks that we saw very early in for the box topper, in which your opponent gets to choose 2 spirits. I think that one was like a 4 cost, 3 reduction. So this is one is kind of like that single targeted one. You got your reductions on board for 1, or you'll be able to exhaust something. And these kind of effects are extremely powerful. They're extremely powerful on the offense because it means you limit the amount of attacks your opponent has. And it's really strong on offense because you get to choose your opponent's spirit, just saying like, you will not be relevant for this attack step. That's incredibly powerful. Basically, the green's existence in the metagame completely shifts the way we need to think about combat math. You have to be so much more careful because any deck for 3 cores are able to say, you overextended, I'm going to go ahead and exhaust that spirit, and now I win, right? It forces us to be a lot more careful. It forces us to be a lot more explosive because now it's like, oh, you gave me an in, exhaust your spirit, now I go in. So these kinds of effects are extremely powerful. Needle Shot obviously being the base level, like, hey, this is what this color does, and you get to choose for it. So I think it's going to see play at some level. It's a solid common, and it just does kind of everything you need it to do. It's not crazy, but it does exactly that. It basically says anything that doesn't have armor, you will not be relevant. So it's while it's not hard removal, it is for that turn, you don't get to do nothing. And in terms of Bandai games, stun effects are absolutely huge. This is not a full stun because obviously your opponent's looking at usage out of it, but it's as close as we've got at this point. Then we've got multiple cores. This is probably my favorite card. 2 cost, 1 green reduction magic burst. When your opponent resolves a spirit's 1 summon effect, select one of your opponent's spirits and exhaust it, and then you may pay this card's cost to activate its main effect, which the main is select one of your spirits, place a core from the void onto it. I love this. This basically says pay 1 core, gain 1 core. It is free ramp. The caveat being you need a spirit. Who cares? We're going to have spirits on the board. And then it has the benefit that if you're like cheeky and know your opponent's about to do some win summon shenanigans, bet. All right, exhaust it. Dude, I love this card. This card is so dope. It doesn't even have to be the one that they went summon with. You can just choose anything. This card is sick. This card is like, in my opinion, instant 4 of in like every single green deck. The only problem with green when we play cards like these are going to be, okay, but how do we make sure we don't run out of gas, right? Because if you're playing a spirit, you're playing this, that costs you 2 cards. If you're playing multiple of these, it costs you 3, 4 cards. It's an incredibly powerful effect. You're trading a card for a core, but then the question is, how are we going to gain advantage? And currently in the starter deck, there's no real way to gain advantage. So hopefully that exists in the main set. If not, it just means that we're going to have to splash other colors to kind of bring that all together. But nevertheless, this card's great. It's awesome. 1 card for 1 core. Has a bonus effect just cause if I need it also. I'm all about it. It's basically free. Big fan. Big fan. Especially since we get the use of the core right away. The core isn't going into our void or anything. We get the core back on a spirit, which is basically like we got it back for free. Fantastic. Big fan. But from there, that is everything that is waiting for us in starter deck 5. I'm incredibly excited. It's a shame that the key spirit isn't doing it for me. Maybe it is for someone else and you guys can show me the way. Please, if you guys have any ideas of how you want that to play out, let me know in the comments down below. But I am so excited for green. It's so refreshing. Reading these spirits has my mind going. You guys know I love multicolor. I'd like to say I'm a multicolor professional a little bit. Just thinking about the ways that we can splash these cards in decks that we already have today. And there's going to be like an additional 100+ cards that we're going to be getting is just so exciting. And the reveals are going to continue. So we are going to continue looking through what it all does. But in general, I think this deck is pretty powerful. I think Swift is incredibly powerful in terms of the keyword ability. I think you have some very solid ramp bodies that already exist. Now you just need better payoffs. I think what this deck is really missing is real payoffs. So starter deck wise, I think you can lend yourself to being a really fantastic tempo deck if you lean more on the Swift stuff. And then you just happen to have some ramp now and then. However, leading into the main set, obviously the Swift stuff is still going to be super powerful because flash summoning is incredibly powerful. I do think we're going to lend ourselves to having better usage for the ramp because now we'll have payoffs. And that's all that this deck is missing is kind of like payoffs, kind of go big in ramp. This obviously kind of really being the only one plus the brand boar. So I think I expect a lot of great things. I think this is an amazing starter deck. If you are thinking about playing green, even if you're not thinking about playing green, I think the fact that you have things like multiple cores, which will ramp you for free, also work for non-green decks because it doesn't specify that is absolutely massive. So generally, I think this is a must pick up, especially going into set 2. But that was my first quick look at the star deck. I could be incredibly wrong. Please, again, let me know down below. And with that said, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Ciao.